Scary telling.
I've always loved spicy food. Even as a kid, I would pour hot sauce on everything from eggs to pizza. But my love for spicy food really took off when I moved to the city for college. I discovered all kinds of new restaurants that served dishes from around the world, each with their own unique blend of spices and heat. But there was one restaurant that stood out from the rest. It was a small hole-in-the-wall place that I stumbled upon by accident. I remember walking past it on my way to class one day and being hit by the most amazing aroma. It was a mix of chili peppers, garlic, and spices that made my mouth water. I couldn't resist going in and trying it out. The menu was full of dishes that I'd never heard of before, each one promising to be spicier than the last. I started off with a mild dish and gradually worked my way up to the hottest one on the menu. I was sweating, my nose was running, and my eyes were watering, but I couldn't stop eating. It was like an addiction. From that day on, I went to the restaurant every week, trying out new dishes and pushing my limits. The spicier the food, the better. I would order the hottest dishes and challenge myself to finish them without drinking any water. It was like a game to me, and I was determined to win. My friends thought I was crazy. They would watch in amazement as I ate dishes that made them wince and gasp. But I couldn't help it. The rush that I felt when eating spicy food was like nothing else. It was like an adrenaline rush that made me feel alive. I started to notice changes in my body too. My tolerance for spicy food increased, and I could eat dishes that I never would have been able to handle before. My mouth became numb to the heat, and I could eat chili peppers like they were candy. But little did I know that my obsession with spicy food would lead to my ultimate downfall. It was a normal day, and I had just finished eating at the restaurant. I was walking back to my car when I felt a sudden impact on the back of my head. I was knocked unconscious, and when I woke up, I was blindfolded and tied up. My head was throbbing, and I was disoriented from being knocked out. I tried to move, but my hands and feet were bound, and I couldn't see anything through the blindfold. I started to panic, wondering what was going on and who had kidnapped me. I heard muffled voices around me, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry, and my throat felt like sandpaper. Finally, one of the voices spoke up. Well, what do we have here?" the voice said. "Looks like we've caught ourselves a little spice addict." I recognized the voice as male, but I couldn't place it. My heart raced as I realized that these people knew about my obsession with spicy food. What did they want from me? The blindfold was suddenly ripped off, and I blinked in the sunlight. I was in a small, dimly lit room with concrete walls and a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. There were 5 men in black masks standing around me, their eyes cold and emotionless. "What do you want from me?" I croaked out, my throat raw. The masked men didn't answer. One of them grabbed me roughly by the chin and forced my mouth open. He shone a flashlight into my mouth, examining my teeth and tongue. "Looks like he's telling the truth," the masked man said. "He's got a real tolerance for spice." The other masked men nodded in agreement. I felt a wave of fear wash over me as I realized that they knew everything about me. "Why am I here?" I demanded. The masked men ignored me and started to talk amongst themselves in low voices. I strained to listen, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Finally, one of them turned to me and spoke. "We have a little experiment we want to try," he said. "You're going to help us test something out." I tried to pull away, but the men held me down. I had a sinking feeling in my stomach that this was not going to end well. The masked men untied me from the chair and roughly pushed me onto a metal table in the center of the room. I felt my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to free myself, but the ropes around my wrists and ankles were too tight. "What are you going to do to me?" I yelled, my voice hoarse. The masked men didn't answer. Instead, they picked up knives and other sharp instruments from a nearby table and started to approach me. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized what was about to happen. The first cut was like nothing I had ever felt before. The blade sliced into my flesh, and I felt a searing pain shoot through my body. I screamed and thrashed, but the men held me down. The sound of the knife scraping against my bones was sickening, and I felt like I was going to pass out. The masked men were methodical in their torture, carefully slicing off strips of skin from my body. They worked their way down my arms, across my chest, and down to my legs. I could see my own blood oozing out of my wounds, and I knew that I was in serious trouble. Time seemed to blur together as the torture continued. I was in so much pain that I couldn't think straight. The masked men didn't seem to care that I was suffering. They just kept cutting and cutting until my entire body was covered in bloody gashes. At some point, I must have lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was lying on the cold concrete floor, my body raw and bleeding. I tried to sit up, but every movement sent waves of pain through my body. I looked around the room, trying to get my bearings. The masked men were gone, and I was alone in the dimly lit room. I knew that I had to get out of there before they came back. But how? I was weak, injured, and tied up. I tried to wriggle out of the ropes around my wrists and ankles, but they were too tight. My mind was racing as I tried to think of a way out. That's when I saw a small metal file on the ground next to me. It must have fallen out of the masked men's pockets during the torture. I reached for the file with shaking hands and started to saw away at the ropes. It was slow and painful work, but eventually, I managed to free myself. I stumbled to my feet, almost falling over from the pain. I knew that I had to get out of there fast. I didn't know what the masked men had in store for me next, but I didn't want to stick around to find out. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and started to move towards the door. I stumbled through the door, my body aching and my mind numb from the pain. I had no idea where I was, but I knew that I had to get as far away from that room as possible. The adrenaline was pumping through my veins, and I started to run, ignoring the searing pain in my wounds. As I ran, I realized that I was outside, in what looked like an abandoned factory. There were broken down machines and rusted metal everywhere, and the air was thick with the smell of spices. It was then that I saw the pit. It was a large hole in the ground, filled with salt and Scotch bonnet chilies. I could feel the heat emanating from it, and I knew that it was where the masked men had thrown my skin. The realization made me sick to my stomach, and I doubled over, retching. But I didn't have time to wallow in my own misery. I could hear footsteps coming from behind me, and I knew that the masked men were after me. I tried to run, but my body was weak and unsteady. I could feel my strength draining away with every step. That's when I heard the sound of a car engine in the distance. I stumbled towards it, hoping that whoever was driving it would be able to help me. As I got closer, I saw that it was a delivery truck, with a company name and logo on the side. I ran towards the truck, waving my arms and yelling for help. The driver stopped the truck and got out, looking at me in shock. "What happened to you?" he asked, his eyes widening as he took in my battered, bloody form. I could barely speak, but I managed to tell him that I had been kidnapped and tortured. The driver looked horrified and immediately called the police. They arrived within minutes, and I was rushed to the hospital. The doctors said that I was lucky to be alive. They treated my wounds as best they could, but they told me that I would never fully recover. The pain would be with me for the rest of my life. As I lay in my hospital bed, my mind raced with thoughts of revenge. Who were the masked men, and why had they done this to me? I was determined to find out and make them pay for what they had done. But before I could do anything, the police came to talk to me. They told me that they had found the factory where I had been held captive and that they had arrested several suspects. They couldn't tell me much more than that, but it was enough to give me a sense of closure. I knew that I would never be the same again. My love for spicy food had led me down a dark path, one that had almost cost me my life. But I also knew that I had to move forward, to find a way to live with the pain and the memories. As I lay there, I made a vow to myself. I would never let my obsessions get the better of me again. I would always be vigilant and watchful, knowing that there were people out there who would do anything to satisfy their own twisted desires. It took months for me to physically recover from my ordeal. The scars on my body were a constant reminder of what had happened to me, but I was determined not to let them define me. I started therapy to help me cope with the trauma and the emotional pain that came with it. During my recovery, I also did some digging into the people who had kidnapped and tortured me. It turned out that they were a group of spice merchants who had become obsessed with creating the perfect blend of spices. They had taken their obsession to the extreme, using human skin to test their creations. The thought made me sick to my stomach. I couldn't believe that people could be so twisted and evil. But it also made me realize that I wasn't alone in my obsession. There were others out there who would do anything to satisfy their desires, no matter how twisted they were. It was a sobering thought, but it also gave me a sense of purpose. I started speaking out about the dangers of obsession, warning others about the risks and the consequences. I wanted to use my experience to help others avoid the same fate that I had suffered. Over time, I learned to live with the pain and the memories. I still loved spicy food, but I approached it with caution and respect. I knew that it was something that could easily consume me if I wasn't careful. The experience had also taught me to appreciate the small things in life. The taste of a simple dish, the feel of the sun on my skin, the sound of a loved one's voice. These were the things that gave life meaning, not the rush of adrenaline that came from a mouthful of hot peppers. As I look back on my experience now, I know that I will never forget what happened to me. But I also know that it has made me stronger, more resilient, and more empathetic to the struggles of others. I will always carry the scars of my past with me, but I will never let